all for joining us on your Friday morning. Today, we are on another series on the Procurement 101. So, if you haven't been following us, we had did the organizational readiness series at the very beginning. If you have not seen that, those are all on YouTube. You can go check those out and on Dr. Siller's LinkedIn page. And we've moved over to Procurement 101 series. And so today we are doing You Found an RFP, Should You Bid? So I'm America Cervantes. I'm the administrative assistant here at Ascent NBS. And as always, I am joined by our founder and CEO, Dr. Arlene Siller. If you are joining live, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and whether you have downloaded an RFP or received a bid opportunity that you were unsure about pursuing. So during our last two conversations, we introduced procurement and discussed what it means for a business to be procurement ready. Today, we are moving to the next decision in that journey, which is you found the opportunity and the scope sounds like work your business can perform. The potential contract value caught your attention, but should you actually bid? Not every opportunity is the right opportunity. A contract can look exciting at first and still be a poor fit once you consider the requirements, costs, timeline, competition, and your capacity to deliver. So today, Dr. Siller is going to help us understand how to make a smart bid or no bid decision before we invest hours, even weeks, preparing for response. So with that, I will jump into our first question for Dr. Siller. So let's begin with the assumption many business owners make. They see a contract that relates to the service or product that they provide and immediately think, this is for us, we should apply. Why isn't recognizing your industry or service and the scope of work enough to make an opportunity a good fit?
Thanks, America. So an opportunity really has to align with what your business does and does well. And it's not to say that you can't look at maybe like a new line of business either. As I mentioned last time in the series, when we were starting to write on the procurement side, has a lot of similarities with grant writing. And so we had to really make sure that we were adequately describing how the two are very much aligned, even though the experience wasn't specifically on procurement at the beginning. So it's not to say that you can't have a new line of business, but you have to have a really good understanding of what the scope of work is. And that's can sometimes be very different from the title or just the general description. There might be a lot more involved in the scope of work, so you need to make sure that you can adequately do it. And then the other thing that we talked about last time too, that fits in terms of your question, is sometimes the scope of work might have various components to it, and it can be, say 10 things that they're looking for. And reading the RFP or the NOFO really well to make sure that are they asking for one agency to have all 10, or are they allowing whoever's applying to determine which ones they are best at, and they're only going to put in for those. So those are things that are important. But some other things to consider is the required experience. Sometimes they might say something and give a particular time frame, like you have to have 5 years of experience in this particular area. And your examples that you might use might only be from the last 3 years. So in those cases, I would really ask the question when you have that open question period, is ask the question, is it really a hard, definitive 5 years before you start applying? Because you don't want to expend all this effort when you could have been working on something else. So sometimes it can be, length of time, insurance requirements. As an example, just in insurance, a lot of times there's specific types of insurance that they're looking for, and a certain value with that insurance policy. So for me, we Ascend are a virtual company. And so for a lot of the contracts that we get, we're usually not working in those cities or counties. We do a lot of work in Colorado and various parts of Texas. And so something like the auto insurance requirement really doesn't apply to us. We're never on their property, things like that. So those are still things that you want to get clarification on, because you don't want to spend all this time developing a really solid proposal. And the one thing that throws you off is the fact that you didn't have the auto insurance requirement that they have in place. And they're not aligning the fact that you are a virtual company, or even that this is a virtual contract, in the sense that they don't expect you to ever be on property. And so that requirement for the auto may have just been a general blanket requirement that the city or county or school district or whatever just puts out. So for anything that is in the RFP and NOFO, ask the questions, because sometimes you will see that there's addenda issue based on the questions that people asked. Last time I also gave y'all just a real world example that we had for one of our clients, where one thing said, that you had to submit a form that's called the 1295 with the application. But then in another part of the NOFO, they had, you didn't have to do it. So it was contradictory. So in asking the question, they issued an addenda to clarify that. So the clarification is not just for you, but, of course, it helps you to determine whether you should spend the time on there or not. But it also helps other businesses and vice versa. So it's really important once they issue, and every agency does it different. Sometimes they have a cutoff date and they won't answer any questions until that cutoff date. And then all the answers to those questions come out. Some of them do it as it's coming in. I prefer those, but we don't get to decide. And so reading through those questions is something that's really important, because it may change how you approach the RFP or whether you even decide to apply. So again, these things are written months in advance. Things may have changed, for the organization that put that out, but they're not going to recall it. And so to get clarification for yourself and for your business, to determine if you should spend the time, it's really important to ask the questions and read them when they come out. And then again, of course, look at those addenda as well, because they'll do things like change the deadline and maybe some of the requirements, things like that. But some other things to consider, that's not just based on whether you should go after it because it matches your codes or your service or your industry, is, do you have the personnel in place to be able to do this work? And that's something that's really important. I think for those of us as business owners, we know it's a tough environment to hire right now, especially for smaller businesses. We don't have necessarily the budgets that larger companies have and full staff to put these things out. So if the contract that you're going after is for a year and you're going to have to hire someone, that can be 3 or 4 months before you actually get that person in place, much less onboarded to really do the job. So you're talking about 5 or 6 months. So those are just, some things to consider is when we're applying, if we do have to bring someone on board, do we have the systems and processes to be able to do that very quickly? If not, we might not meet the requirements contractually for the timeline and what we said we would do in terms of that scope of work. Also, some other things would be like equipment. It is another important thing, especially if you have to buy something in order to meet the demand of that contract, or you need it in order just to maybe advance your product that you're doing. So, getting a loan and things like that, if you needed to for the equipment, can take some time. So, we have to think about that. Also considering, the location, timeline. I mentioned insurance already. And then just your financial capacity. Some of these bids require a bond. Some of them may ask you for proof of a line of credit or a statement from the bank with regard to a certain amount that's in the account, because most of these are reimbursements. And so they want to make sure that you have the money to pay your staff, to buy whatever you need to buy to do the work before you get reimbursed for the actual effort after you submit your invoices and things like that. So those are some things to consider as well. And the goal is really, don't feel pressured to pursue every opportunity. Sometimes even a great opportunity you might have to pass on for a variety of reasons. It could be that it's a really busy time for you. We have the holidays coming up. I know a lot of businesses are gearing up for that. Black Friday is a huge time for a lot of businesses and things like that. So writing a bid during that time might not be a good thing. You might spend the time and forget some forms or not do something correctly, and you kind of wasted your time when you could have spent it on something that is really going to generate revenue for your business at that particular time. So just thinking through those things. Businesses really need to be strategic about what they can compete for and deliver successfully. And winning the wrong contract for your business at that particular time can be serious and have either operational or financial issues associated with it. And you just don't want to find yourself in that situation. Going after a contract and it creating a lot more stress for you as a business owner is really just not something you need. So find something that's the right fit at the right time.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So moving into question number 2. So let's just say I'm a business owner and an opportunity just landed in my inbox. Before I get excited about the contract amount or begin writing, what are the first things I should examine?
Give yourself adequate time to read through the RFP or NOFO, or if you have a staff member that can do that, give that to them so that they have enough time. It is not one of those things that you should skim read. So it's really important that you really read through it, understand the little nuances that are always there in these things. So we want to make sure the scope is really a good fit for our company. So we are providing exactly what the buyer is requesting. And we can do that with either the staff we have in place, or we have a strategy to hire quickly if that's necessary, or to partner with other companies. You may end up being the prime and, having subs, those kinds of things. And then making sure we do meet the eligibility requirements. They also put sample contracts in most of these, or will direct you to a website that has it. It's important to look at those things because a lot of political things can sometimes be attached to these bids that may be in conflict with, how you feel personally or something like that. And so that's another thing to kind of take a look at, because there's, check boxes and signatures that you have to put on certain things. So taking a look at that as well. Really matching your past performance to the work that they're looking for. So it's not one of those things where you can just say, like on a resume, I worked at XYZ, and you're just putting the general things that you did. You need to take the past performance that you've had, either as your business or you as the individual. You may have done this when you worked for another company, so you possess the experience, but your current company maybe doesn't have the experience under here. You're looking to gain that. So really being able to describe those things. So, when I worked for a nonprofit before, there were certain things that, we did in that environment that isn't something that necessarily Ascend NBS has done as a contract. But I still possess that experience. And so we want to relate our experience, whether it be in the past working for someone else, maybe we had another business before, but how it relates to the work that this buyer is looking for in terms of that scope of work. And so really being able to demonstrate the relevant experience, not just experience in general. And then we've talked about the capacity. So the people, the equipment, the systems, partners, and the time to deliver it. So we want to make sure we have all of that. And then making sure it's a financial fit. So especially if there's a bond involved, if there's a requirement for proof of certain of income, whether that be in bank accounts, line of credit, those kinds of things. Another thing that some of them ask for will be, your credit report and your credit score. So do you have that under the business, not necessarily the individual, like under Arlene? We want to have that for the business. And so being able to produce those documents. Some of the forms and things like that also require a notary. And so, do you have access to that? And most of us do in terms of our banking relationships. So I bank with Chase, and so I use the notary services that are available through there. But if you don't have that with your bank, do you have a notary available to be able to do that? So, you want to look at those forms and see what's a requirement ahead of time. Some of them might ask you for a recent P&L statement. So just being able to have access to that, especially if you're, using a, maybe a third party bookkeeping service or something like that, making sure you can get to those documents quickly and efficiently. And then, the other things that you want to take a look at, that submission deadline is really important. If it's due next Wednesday, do you have the time this weekend to work on it? Do you have the time on Monday and Tuesday to clean it up and get it submitted in time? And being realistic with yourself, not feeling like you have to go after everything. Give yourself the permission to pass. Sometimes it's just not the right time. Sometimes that's a good thing. You never know what you could have been getting yourself into if you would have applied. But there are some things that you can do to be proactive in terms of just having a lot of this documentation ready, keeping it in the digital folder like we talked about before. And so all of those things, can help you with, a lot of the admin attachments or portions like, when it's asking for an organization chart, right? Like that, those are things that we can keep and have ahead of time so that we're not having to do it under there. So that if we do find one that is due next Wednesday, maybe we can get to it because we already have a lot of these documents in place. And then we're just writing the narrative and maybe, working on a budget or whatever in order to submit. Sometimes they will have mandatory meetings. And so that's another thing that's important. These meetings are during the day when we're working, and so sometimes they have a playback if you missed it. But it's important to attend those. Obviously, if it's mandatory, it's a requirement. But also, it's important for you in case there are questions that you've had about the RFP. Sometimes it's an opportunity to answer. I know we all hate it. I wish they wouldn't do it where, basically it's just a PowerPoint of the RFP where they're just reading it and like won't even open it up to questions. Like such a waste of time, but still it's mandatory. So you got to go. Really taking advantage of the question time. As I said, I've never met an RFP or NOFO where there wasn't something questionable in it, didn't make sense, confusing, all of those things. So it's really important to get your questions answered. You don't want to of winning an award either. And then now you have this requirement that you didn't know about. And now you're, trying to determine, do I pass on this? Like maybe this isn't a really good idea for the company. So, you don't want to find yourself in those situations because they've spent a considerable amount of time going through this process and selecting your organization for you to decline it because you didn't read something, in the RFP or something like that. A lot of them are using portals, which is the best thing. So if there are any procurement people on here, please stop making us, apply by mail. It's painful for the small businesses. So I'm going to put that. That's my, what do they call it? My public service announcement. Stop making us put things in by snail mail, FedEx, all of that. Use a portal. You're probably already paying for it in your, school district, county, hospital, whatever. Like, have us put it in that way. But anyway, they require registrations, obviously with their company or their department or their government entity, but sometimes they can also require one in the city that they operate in, because that's a city requirement. So you just want to make sure that you have the required registrations, any insurance and bonding requirements. You've secured all of the forms. Sometimes the forms aren't in the package. They're hyperlinks that you have to go and get from other places. So those are going to be something that's important, giving yourself enough time to do that. The length of the contract, being cognizant of that. I was just talking to a friend of mine that they were secured a contract, and it's a 6-month contract. And so, there's a lot to get done within that time frame. So just making sure that, you can do the work within that time period. The geographic requirements, especially if there's going to be travel and things like that for you, that's important. Or if you have to have a crew that is in some place, then there's hotels and meals and everything else, and mileage and, maybe plane tickets, all those kinds of things that you need to consider. Really looking at the evaluation criteria that they're going to use to score your proposal and writing to that, which we talked about last time. And if you missed that, you can go back on our YouTube and take a look at that, because that was something that was really important in terms of what you're writing to and who you're writing to. But you have to also find out, is subcontracting permitted? And then what's the requirements of that subcontractor? Sometimes it's just putting the company's name down, the resume, including them in terms of what is the work that they're doing. But sometimes, like one that I wrote not too long ago for one of our clients, the subcontractor also had to provide financial statements, credit scores, those kinds of things. And so while sometimes your subcontractor might be great at doing the work, but what if they have a bad credit score, right? So that may drag your application down. And those aren't always easy conversations to have from owner to owner, but it's important because yours might be great and you might be good at doing your portion, and you just have this one, task that's in the scope of work that the subcontractor can do and do really well, but their business is not set up healthy, and that can drag your score down. And then just knowing whether the award is one provider, multiple providers, or, the providers get to choose the things that they do very well and not have to apply to or, mention or have it as the work that they do in terms of those things that just aren't a good match for them.
So I did have a question when it comes to the question deadline. The question deadline, is it normally like kind of hidden within the RFP, or is it outside, like on the website, or what is your experience with the deadlines? Are they pretty straightforward, or they're kind of hidden in that like 87-page document?
No, they're pretty straightforward and normally are on the first page. So I will say that is one thing that they probably do very well. However, I have applied for something that says like today is August 7th, but it will say that it's due Thursday, August 7th, right? So they get the day and the date mixed up. I have seen ones where they use 12 a.m. instead of p.m. or vice versa. And so are there mistakes sometimes in the deadline? Yes, but it is normally very prominently displayed, and kind of after the RFP number, the title, and the agency, normally the date is right there. And so, in terms of the date, you don't want to be applying the day of. Anything can happen on the portal, things like that. Now, if it's one of the mail-ins, which hopefully procurement people are going to stop doing, but if it's one of the mail-ins, that makes it even more challenging. So I have used the U.S. Postal Service, I've used FedEx, and I've used UPS. And even though we pay for things like a 2-day overnight, I have had situations where, because of weather, anything that they consider acts of God, or, some extenuating circumstance, where my stuff did not get delivered on time, even though I did it really with enough time. There was one time where there was freezing conditions in the southeast portion of the U.S., and my proposals, because you had to submit multiple ones, were sitting in a warehouse for a couple of days because of the ice storm. And so I gave it 4 days, and I paid for overnight, and still it did not get there in time. And so, the city that I was applying to was just like, sorry, and sent it back, so just so I mean, we kind of prefer not to go after ones with the mail-in, because there's so many things that can happen, and you spend so much time on these things. And so, we try not to do those either, because of those reasons. And UPS, FedEx do not guarantee anything, and they do not give you your money back. So.
Okay, my second question that I had for you was, for the RFPs, based on your experience, how long are they normally open for?
I would say on average, maybe about 21 days, and some more or less. I would say when they have really tight windows, there is probably a situation, not always, but there's probably a situation where they already know who they want to hire. So they've decreased the deadline because they want to make it challenging for others to apply, because they probably have already been in some form of communication with the company that they really want to hire. So when I see those, I have seen something as short as 7 days, right?
Whoa.
And so in those cases, I don't apply, because obviously they already know who they want. So there's no point in me spending any of my time. We're not going to get it. And so I would say when you see, a real 21, 30 days, 45 days, they're really looking for someone. The other thing that you can do is a lot of these, especially if it's government, it's a little different on the corporation side. Maybe even some school districts may or may not have it. I don't know. But on the government side, when they're meeting about RFPs or a particular scope of work for something, those records are public. There's a transcript that's associated with it. So you could go back and see like how long they've been discussing this topic, in our case, like grant writing, and what that has been. And so that'll give you some indication, like they really don't know who to hire. They know they need the service, and so they're going to put this out. So there's, kind of things like that associated with it too.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I have one last question. I know we couldn't get to question 3 and 4, so I'm gonna skip to question number 5. And the last question is, everything that you've talked about seems like a significant decision process, and one that has to happen before the full proposal is written. Where can a NBS step in when a business has identified an opportunity but is unsure whether to move forward?
Yeah, so when you have a contract, with us, what we can do is when those opportunities come up, we can review the solicitation for you, provide a summary based on the things that we know about your business and what you're interested in doing. So we will match what we know about your business. We will have an introductory meeting with you to learn about the business, learn about geography you may want to go into, the products and services that you provide, those kinds of things, so that when we are reviewing the solicitation, we can make sure it's a good fit for you. We ask you a lot of questions too about the scope, requirements, restrictions, all those kinds of things to know what you do or don't have as a business owner. What your insurance limits are and things like that. So we'll have all of that in place when we meet with you at the beginning so that we can make sure it's a good fit for you. And then let you know if something is a little off, like say you have a $500,000 policy for insurance, but they require $1 million. That way you have the opportunity to look into it with your insurance company and find out, well, what's the additional cost and is it worth it for me to get it, kind of thing. And then we'll also identify the mandatory compliance items on there and make you aware of that. We'll examine the evaluation criteria and let you know at that point you have to have, you have to be the one to do all 10 things. They do or don't allow subcontractors or anything like that. So you will know those things. We compare the opportunity to your qualifications and capacity and just let you know those things. We're not going to make the decision for you. It's your business. You know what you are trying to do with your business in terms of its strategy and goals and all those kinds of things. We help you through the process by reviewing this, looking for any gaps, addressing any questions at that time too, and helping you to submit the questions if you need us to. And then, making sure that we have a good proposal strategy. And then we can do the writing for you if you choose to pursue. And we're here to be a sounding board throughout that whole process before the writing of whether you should or should not. Again, we're not going to make decisions for you. It's your business, but we can help you with that. And then monitoring any addenda changes, the questions. We can attend the mandatory meeting for your business, on your business's behalf, make sure that you get the credit for being there. And then preparing any of the submission requirements and post-award compliance.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Siller. I know we went just a little over time. As you said, if you've identified an RFP or contract opportunity and need help understanding the requirements or deciding whether it's a fit for your business or developing the response, you can scan the QR code at the very top of the screen. You can select more of our services. Once you open up our website, there is a tag at the very top. It says bids and proposals. You can go ahead and click that and then start working on the survey. That way we can learn more information about you. And as always, we record all of our LinkedIn Lives and post them on YouTube. So if you're watching the replay, hello, glad that you're here. And then we also have it on Dr. Siller's profile as well. Again, thank you guys for joining us this Friday. Thank you, Dr. Siller, for your knowledge and wisdom every other Friday. And we will see you on the next one. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.